Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the Pranic Healing Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jason Ren. And on this episode, we're going to talk about a really interesting topic related to energy healing and if the consent or the act of consent really matters when you're working on a patient or a client. And joining us as a guest speaker is Alison Sahoo. Alison has a bachelor's in physics and also has her master's in business administration. She began her pranic healing journey over a decade ago in 2013, and she serves as the executive director of Pranic Healing Bucks County, a 501c3 organization that hosts regular in-person and online meditations and healing events. Alison is also a certified pranic psychotherapist as well as a teacher trainer. So please welcome Alison.
Hello, Jason. So nice to be here.
Yes, thank you again, Alison, for being back for part 2 of our interview. And I'm really excited to talk about the concept of consent, especially with energy healing, because that's something that we get a lot. And often I think about a lot as healers as well, whether or not it really matters when it comes to working on clients. But for the audience that might not be familiar with energy healing, how consent works, can you kind of describe for us the background in terms of why would we even need to ask that question if consent matters? Because I think a lot of people sometimes get confused with energy healing, that sometimes it has to work with consent or it doesn't work with consent. So can you lay us that background for us and just give us some information, especially for those that might not be familiar with energy healing?
Yeah. So consent in energy healing and elsewhere in the world just basically means that the client agrees to the service. The client asks for it, they agree to it, they have an idea of what's going to happen. Energy healing is a little bit different than other services like medical procedures because you don't actually have to be in the same room with your healee. We we don't touch the skin, right? We work on the energy body. So we can work remotely. We don't have to have the person in our office or in our clinic to work on them. So that means that they may not necessarily be aware that we are doing a healing for them if they're not there, which opens
A lot of interesting doors, because I'm just thinking of when I first took basic pranic healing, and I'm like, let me try working this on one of my family members, but they're asleep and I don't want to call them, I don't want to wake them up, right? It's in the middle of the night. So I think that's a very interesting scenario. And you mentioned the remote part, right, which is very unique, where you can work on someone even though they're not physically right in front of you.
Yes, and that's one of the amazing things about energy healing. That's just one of the practical, very useful, and very amazing things about it. So
Okay.
yeah, there's so many scenarios where you may not be able to explicitly say to someone, hey, I see you're in pain. Would you like some help? I can do a little pranic healing on you. But there may be a reason to offer that to somebody, even if
Mhm.
they can't, even if you can't have that conversation with.
Yes. So can you help the audience understand, Allison? Because sometimes with energy healing, I find it the analogy I use is almost like washing your hands or taking a shower, right? Especially with pranic healing, that we talk about the cleansing aspect, right? Where we remove the disease congested energy first before we add energy to the system, versus other modalities like Reiki, which is more focused on just putting energy into the system. When I say system, I mean the bodies. Is that why it comes up, right? Sometimes you don't need to ask for consent. It's like, is it like you're kind of washing their hands for them, or kind of cleaning sort of that dirty, stuck energy out of their body?
It can be. It can be just something very simple where you're just you're just doing something very easy for them. It's not kind of a big healing. Could also be the person's in a coma. They're in a hospital on the other side of the world. And our group has. A lot of chronic healers have been in situations like that where we've been asked to work on someone who wasn't conscious, so not able to give consent, or we were asked by, say, the mother of a child, someone in her care. So yeah, it can be sort of anything from
Mhm.
something very simple to something more serious, where there just may not be a an opportunity to say to the person, would you like this pranic healing?
Okay, so it sounds like, again, not especially in kids, right? Or even in people that might not be aware of it, to have to ask for consent, but we still do it. And it sounds like there are results, right? There are results. And I think you led a very amazing pranic healing pod during COVID. So if you can kind of help explain that, because I think that's one of the more amazing effects of energy healing and remote energy healing, specifically with pranic healing, is to affect people's lives, thousands of miles across the world, and them not even knowing it, right? You had a group of people working on them. So can you kind of share a little bit about that with us, and especially
Yeah.
regards to consent?
Yeah. So our pod of chronic healers has been working since early 2020 as part of Project Hope for Healing. We're one pod. There are quite a few others around the U.S. and some other countries, which started, as you know, during COVID. We got requests to work on very, very ill people when the Delta variant was active. Many of those people were in hospital. Many of them were severely ill. Many of them did not realize that they were receiving healing. But the people who asked on their behalf usually were family members. Sometimes they were friends of the person, and they didn't know what else to do because there were no treatments at that time. So they kind of turned to pranic healing in desperation, and we saw a lot of people get better. I'm not going to say every person recovered, but quite a few had really amazing recoveries. And most of the severely ill people that we worked on were not aware that their partner, their child, their parent, their sibling, etc., had requested healing on their behalf.
Yeah, that's really amazing. I remember kind of looking at the statistics and seeing how many families and how many people and lives we were able to help to do that. And that was part of the Pranic Healing Initiative, that you mentioned, the Pranic Healing Pods during COVID. And it was such a honor to participate, because it really, as healers, as pranic healers on our end, sometimes it's almost like too good to be true as well, even though this is something that we do and that we're passionate about and that we love. But to see such transformation and to be part of these groups, I think it really goes to show, sometimes you don't even need to know that you're getting healed. And I feel like that's a lot of how miracles happens in life, right? We might be aware of, like, oh, I got better, but to understand, like, the process in which you got better, and to know that, oh, you had like a group of 5 people working on you every day, for several weeks at a time. That's pretty amazing. Would you say so, Allison?
Yes. Yeah, it was and it continues to be really an amazing thing. And the way I feel about it is, if I were in that position, would I want help? Would I want help? And there are people who we decline to work on. It's not that we do or are able to accept every request. That would be impossible. But we do accept quite a lot of them, and we've seen amazing results from it.
Yeah. Excellent. And I'm curious too now, Allison. Now with that, we kind of discussed, like, okay, consent might not matter as much in terms of receiving the healing benefits. Does, let's say, a person that doesn't want it, like
Mhm.
a person that doesn't want healing, they kind of verbalize that, they put that intention out there, it's been known. Can we as healers still go ahead and work on them despite their resistance? Is that something that's possible?
That's an interesting question. So our group does not, just because we're busy, and if they say they don't want, then they don't want, that's fine. But whether or not it would work, now that's another question. And It's really all about if on a higher level the person is receptive. Sometimes people will say they don't want something, but they really do.
Mm.
Sometimes they'll say they want it, but they really don't. And personally, I've done healings outside of our pod of pranic healers in both of those situations where a person said that they wanted healing, but then I came to see that really there were reasons why on a deeper level they didn't. And then people have also expressed skepticism and they've said, "Oh, I don't think this can work. I don't even know why I'm here." And then you do a little for them, and all of a sudden they feel it and they have a result. So it's kind of all over the map. And ultimately, it comes down to, on a very fundamental level, they are open to being healed. And some are, and a few aren't.
Yeah, and I think that that goes back to what you mentioned, Allison, about receptivity, because receptivity is one of those really important principles that we as healers, as pranic healers, that we want to always aim for, right? Because if a person is not receptive, they are not going to get like 100% of the value from the
Yeah.
healing, right? There are so many different aspects that you've mentioned, right? Sometimes people will have their suspicions and doubts, and that inner resistance, and like you mentioned, they will still sometimes get the benefits, right? The healing benefits from it. But is it true that if a person is, again, allowing consent and is receptive, meaning that they have an open mind, they might not understand it completely, but they're willing to try, does that, in your experience, do the healings tend to work better in that case?
Yes. Yes. And there are degrees of receptivity. There's sort of a
Mm.
scale. I don't see receptivity as kind of a binary thing. It's more of a shades of gray type of thing. And yeah, some people are much more receptive than other people are.
Can you explain that? Because it sounds like there's different levels to it in terms of receptivity. So that's kind of the first time I've heard of it. But maybe if you explain it, it'll connect with the audience and kind of like connecting it back to healing.
Yep. Well, at kind of a basic level, if a person has some inner receptivity, they may not be expressing it. They may not know that they're receiving healing, or they may show up and have a bit of a gruff exterior. But inside they want that healing. They want something better. They want the benefit, the result. Then there are people who show up smiling. They say thank you. They tell you, "Oh, I'm really grateful for this. Thank you for taking the time." They will pay you. They'll make a donation. Maybe they'll give you some shrimp scampi. It's always
Oh,
good. They do something, right? They do
I've never
something.
had that before, but I need to find patients like that.
Yeah, they're good. Those
Yeah.
patients are really good. And they just by their demeanor show they're more open. They sit in a more open way, they smile, they listen. And that said, there are people who don't do those things, but they have amazing healings too, because that inner receptivity is just so high.
Mm.
So my feeling is, as long as somebody is showing up somehow, it's worth doing a healing or two to see if.
That and thank you for kind of explaining that, Allison, because I think a lot of people, especially when it comes to being their first time getting an energy healing session, it might be very black and white, right? It's either I consent to it or I don't. But even with the consent, there's so many shades and gradients, like you mentioned, of like being receptive. And when we say receptive, you're just open. You're open to whatever comes in, and whatever comes in, you take in and you absorb it and you use it. And I think that applies in so many different areas.
Yeah.
In addition to energy healing, right? We can say that in school, right? When a teacher teaches a certain lesson in a topic, right? There's different receptivity in students, and some students will pick it up right away and understand it, try to learn it, and do the work. Where some students might just like just understand the title and the superficial details, but never really dive deep into the core of the lesson. So I think that's the amazing part about energy in general is that we can apply it to so many different areas. And like you mentioned, some patients cook you shrimp scampi, which that's the first time I've heard of that. And
That's a true
again,
story,
I need to
actually.
find, if you can't get paid, at least get paid in food, which sounds like a good deal there. But yeah, so in terms of, specifically in pranic healing, though, Allison, and as you know, pranic healing is almost like having a PhD in energy healing, just because our system is so organized and it is what we call protocol based, meaning that there's step by step instructions in which we approach every condition, whether it's physical or emotional. In your experience, Allison, when it comes to these degrees of consent, is it equal on both sides? Like for both physical conditions and emotional conditions? Like if because sometimes what I say and why I ask that question is sometimes patients, you mentioned that sometimes patients might have resistance, but they'll still get the results, right? They'll still get the healing. Sometimes what I notice with psychotherapy patients, right, with mental and emotional conditions, they might reach out to you and they might want the healing, but there's almost like a deeper inner resistance that is holding on to that depression or anxiety.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes more to get out of them. So that's why I find it interesting with consent too, because
Yeah,
people with physical pain, they're like, oh yeah, just take the pain away, it's bothering me, I don't want this anymore. But usually with psychotherapy patients, I find it to be a little bit more tricky. So
I agree.
what's your take on that?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I agree. Yeah, I mean, the psychological stuff, I believe it goes deeper. It's it's not as visible as the physical stuff is. A lot of times people don't even realize that they are depressed. They don't realize that they have these thoughts or feelings because it's normal for them, right? They think everybody has those thoughts and feelings. Getting to where, they know that they don't feel good. They know that they're not happy, but they don't really have a full understanding of everything that goes into that. The psychotherapy, it still works, but it's a longer process. And I also think that kind of building and maintaining that receptivity is also a process, keeping the person engaged in the healings, keeping them kind of focused that yes, things are changing for them. Because as your worldview changes, it's easy not to recognize it. That's why they take the before and after pictures with the pranic facelift, right? I wish we could take before and after pictures with psychotherapy, but keeping people kind of aware the results that they're getting, the benefits that they're getting, so that they do have that appreciation that things have
Mhm.
changed for them. That
Yeah.
just comes with doing a lot of healings and being exposed to a lot of different situations. But yeah, the
Cool.
results are amazing. The results can absolutely be amazing.
Yeah, and I know you've gone through the, chronic psychotherapy certification, which is rigorous because you're working on usually people with more of severe cases or more complicated cases of different mental and emotional conditions. And for an example, to kind of give the audience idea, like working with kids with autism, right,
Mhm.
kids with schizophrenia, right, more of these complicated neurological conditions can be quite challenging. And sometimes it's challenging to see the progress in results as you're describing, because it might be that they don't react, kind of in a harsh way, less frequently. Instead of like 10 times in a day, it might be 9 times in a day. And sometimes that's hard to tell, especially as the healer or, whoever is their caretaker or parents or family members. But, what's really amazing about pranic healing is that we have an objective based system. We can scan the energy, we can feel it, we can see the changes, and as you see when you go through the certification process, with
Yeah.
each healing session. And I find that I totally agree with you. Why it's always a little challenging for these types of conditions because we don't see it right away with our eyes. But if you do energy work, you can just scan and notice the difference.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And in terms of that, I was wondering, Allison, do you have any like experiences or case studies that you've worked on specifically where you have had more of these, maybe it's a challenging case and, they've come to you, they've given their consent, right? And as with any healing, there's ups and downs, but do you have any like cases or stories where you've worked on someone and the progress might not be so obvious, meaning it's like not just a linear straight up, but there's just some ups and downs along the way?
A lot of those cases. Yes, a lot of those cases. I'm just kind of thinking through for somebody who's not going to be watching this podcast. Because, yes, I mean, I don't give identifying details. I don't
Sure.
want somebody to see themselves. I don't want some. So let me talk a little bit more generally. Yeah, yeah, we have a lot of those cases. One of the things that we try to do, and this kind of goes to building receptivity and getting consent really, really solid. When we work on these complicated cases with very deep, deep issues, I invite people to come to our regular events. Come at least once a week to meditation on Twin Hearts. At least once a week. Better yet, twice a week. Some people come even more than that. And we've had people who have come 2 or 3 times a week regularly, regularly. Every time they come, they make a donation. And they've gotten great results, even though they've had very significant issues. We've had people who have come very regularly and have had great results, but over a longer period of time, over a longer period of time. But still, you can still see the progress, and they keep coming because they see the progress too. They see it as well. Some people, it's faster. There have been some cases we've taken on that I really thought we would be working for a long time, and after a few weeks, tremendous improvement. There have been other cases where we have put a lot of resources, like several healers, working on some folks, and it's been much more incremental, even though they've said that they want the healing and they're grateful for the healing. So, there's definitely a variation there,
Mhm.
but there's always progress. It's just a question of how quick it is. There's always progress.
Yeah. Yeah, and I find that to be true too. And it's always interesting too, right? Because when we think of energy healing, sometimes we think it's just from the session, right? The healing is just
Mhm.
coming from the healer working on the client. But as you mentioned, sometimes it's also doing the work, maybe not as directly, but doing like meditation. And specifically with meditation on Twin Hearts, we understand that there is a huge healing component to it as well because it's goes by the pranic healing principles, which is cleansing, which where we're removing the stuck stagnant energy, and then there's the energizing part, which the sort of divine energy, spiritual energy, comes down from the crown and sort of kind of taps into the other energy centers. And I have to agree with you that the healing is definitely very different and progress varies. I think I asked this question about the sort of the healing cases and how people have ups and downs in the journey because I find that also what's interesting in speaking of consent and receptivity is that we know we have the incarnated soul. And for that, those that don't know, the incarnated soul is the portion of your higher soul that is living through our physical body, our emotions, and our thoughts. What's interesting is sometimes, and this is going more down to the spiritual route to explain this, is sometimes the higher soul wants the lower self, the incarnated soul, to experience disease and not have it heal right away because having the disease is almost like a lesson. It
Yeah.
is a teaching tool for that soul to experience certain hardships, to get into certain relationships with certain people, and to go through the process. For a lot of people like us, it's like, oh, why would we want to suffer more and have this condition longer? And sometimes it's like, well, it's really not up to you, your choice, even though you're seeking out this healing. And that's why I find it's always so rewarding because, like you said, no matter what is happening, whether you are getting the healing or not, there's something bigger that's going around in the background that we might not be aware of. But it's safe to say that it's all working out for your highest good and highest purpose. Would you agree with that, Allison?
Most definitely. Most definitely. And in those cases where we have more knowledge of the person's life, what's sort of the bigger picture for them. A lot of times as healers, we can kind of make some guesses as to why this is happening for them and what they may be getting from it. Maybe there's a component of karma there. And normally for me, and I think for our group, we start thinking about those things when we don't see progress as quickly as we would expect to. For little things, they pretty much clear up. But when we have someone who just keeps having some things, that's when we start sort of expanding our understanding of the situation and start looking at those. Even with that, though, you know, we do learn. We do learn. All of us do learn. And especially when you're working with a healer, with a pranic healer who can bring some things to your attention and to say, well, we've we've done 10 healings, we've done 20 healings now. Have you considered this? I notice that this other thing is going on in your life. I have a theory. What would you think about this? And sometimes you can really get some great insights,
Mhm.
some ahas from the person there.
Excellent. Yeah, it's always so, and this is what we try to do in medicine is always to get a really complete patient history, right? Because sometimes if you don't ask that one question, you're missing out on a whole different area that you might not be addressing in terms of what we like to say, like the root cause of it all, right? And I think what's interesting in chronic healing though is that even though we might not get all the information, we can still scan the chakras, and we almost get like a brief summary of what they're coming in with without even them saying a word. So I find that to be the very neat party trick part for healing. So thank you for sharing that. That's always so important when we look at whether you're going to get a healing yourself or whether you're doing the healing. It's always important to be thorough and looking at a person as a whole, long term, and seeing their life story. Like, oh, okay, this kind of makes sense in how certain things played out. But you mentioned this that happened here. Let's explore this because it sounds like it was a pretty important
And
time in
that's
life.
where we can really, as healers, as pranic healers, that's where we can really shine by being able to spend a little bit more time, by being able to take that broader approach.
Yes. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Allison, for speaking on this topic. I know it's such an interesting topic, and for me, I think about it all the time. Because when I see people like, "Oh, I see you have some pain there that you just recently got. I wonder if I can help you." But there's always that interplay of, am I having too much? Am I giving too much? Should I just mind my own business? Right from the healer side. But in terms of sort of closing off the podcast here, Allison, do you have any final words of advice for specifically healers that have taken pranic healing, have taken maybe any other modality, right? Whether it's Reiki, acupuncture, herbalism. I find the common theme is that we're always so generous and we want to give and we want to help, and sometimes we just kind of skip over the consent part. Do you have any words of advice going through so many cases and working with so many clients? What is your word of advice for those types of people that are looking to give without consent and also give without receiving, because that's an important part too.
If you were in the other person's shoes, would you want the healing? Would you want the help? You may not know everything, you may not have access to the higher soul information or the big purpose or anything like that, but just right off the top of your head, if you were in the other person's shoes, would you want the healing? And most of the time, my answer is yes. If I'm in trouble and if someone can help, thank you so much.
I don't even know if I could answer no in that case. I'm like, of course, why not? That makes so
Why
much
not?
sense. And I love how you say that because I feel like that's how the universe, God, source is always. It's like the miracles. I should say it's always there. But it's us that tends to bottleneck and limit and resist it. But
For sure.
that's an amazing question. I will ask myself that every time. I'm like, oh yeah, I would like to take that. Yeah.
Jason,
All right,
thank you so
Allison. Well, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful conversation as always. And, I always appreciate the work that you do with your in person and online events and all the amazing people that you're able to, attract into your group. And again, your group especially with the Pranic Healing Pods, was so pivotal in the many groups that we're doing during COVID, and so appreciative of all the work that you're doing, Allison. So, again, thank you so much for being on this podcast. Thank you, everyone else, for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we would love if you would leave a rating and a comment, as this helps support and grow the podcast. So that's all for today. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you in the next episode.